In the span of 41 seconds, two students and two teachers were killed, and nine others were wounded in the 2024 Apalachee High School shooting in Georgia. Then 14-year-old Colt Gray was charged with 55 felony counts related to the killings. However, he wasn't the only one to be slapped with murder charges over the school shooting. Colt's father, Colin Gray, was charged with over 24 counts, including second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. On March 3rd, even before his son went to trial, a jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Colin Gray guilty of all charges. Before Colin Gray's case, Jennifer and James Crumbley, the parents of Ethan Crumbley, the convicted mass murderer who was 15 when he opened fire in a Michigan high school, were the first parents to be convicted of involuntary manslaughter for a school shooting carried out by a child. But Gray's conviction is even more aggressive. He is the first parent of an alleged school shooter to be found guilty of murder charges. Ryan Brown, a criminal defense attorney, joins Forbes True Crime to react to the history-making ruling. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Ryan Brown. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm really interested in getting your perspective here on a landmark ruling because it took a jury less than 2 hours to find Colin Gray, the father of an accused school shooter, guilty of over 24 counts, including second-degree murder. And this is a historic ruling. Like I said, Gray is the first parent of an accused school shooter to ever face and be convicted of murder charges. So to start off the conversation, what are your thoughts on the verdict?
Yeah. So the first thing that stood out about the verdict was just how quick it came back. Right. It was a long trial with a lot of evidence, a couple of weeks long, and that quick verdict obviously is usually good for the prosecution. So that means they weren't arguing about much in the back. So it really is a kind of a landmark verdict.
I want to talk about what came out in trial, and I first want to lay out some of the evidence that prosecutors presented because they first accused Colin Gray of giving his son Colt a gun, not restricting access to it, despite knowing that he had some mental health issues going on. Then Colin Gray apparently bought that gun months after law enforcement showed up at his door. They were knocking over this tip that they received that connected Colt, his son, to a school shooting threat that he made allegedly on the app Discord. Colt Gray apparently also had what prosecutors called a shrine to Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland school shooter, in his room, and that room was in Colin's house. Colt Gray's family also testified that he was violent and had mental health issues. The teen's mom said, quote, "It was very obvious that he needed some professional help, and she thought her husband just didn't want to deal with it." That's what she said. Also, Colt's little sister testified that she apparently wasn't surprised when there was a school shooting and it came out that he was the alleged shooter. After the shooting, though, body cam footage caught Colin Gray when law enforcement showed up at his door saying, "God, I knew it," when they came and they were talking about that school shooting. In your opinion, what was the strongest piece of evidence that prosecutors presented?
So I think the strongest is his own statement of "I'm not surprised." Right. The evidence focused on whether he knew or should have known basically that his child was a threat. The crew stuff, the shrine, all of that stuff is bad. Certainly, it was all damaging for the defense. But when he's on that body cam saying he's not surprised, it was him. That is, at that point, it's not the state saying anything; it's him.
And to that point, I don't think after a school shooting, if law enforcement showed up at someone's house, the parents' first thought would be, "Oh my God, my kid's the shooter." I think a lot of parents would think, "Oh my God, my kid is the victim." But I want to get your perspective as a defense attorney. I want to talk about the defense's case because obviously the jury thought it was pretty weak, right? If they only took less than 2 hours to deliberate over the facts. But the attorney said that Colin Gray was manipulated by his son Colt. He tried helping his son. He bought that gun for father-son bonding. And then this was a quote that the attorney for Colin Gray said. He never in a million years thought that his son that he loved was going to turn out to be a monster that killed these people. What do you make of the defense's argument?
Yeah, so these were very good defense lawyers representing the defendant in this case, and they did a good job, right? This is a novel kind of prosecution where the parent is being accused, so it's not something where you're going to talk to a bunch of other lawyers who have handled cases just like this, right? But you can't get new facts as a defense lawyer. Sometimes the facts are bad. And I think they still did, despite the verdict, a good job of kind of this is Georgia, right? Like, we love our guns here. It's not uncommon for a parent and a child to have a gun, but they can't and ultimately could not get around these bad facts that were the red flags that they should have been aware of. So I think they did a very good job with what they had. I think the arguments were what any good lawyer would have argued. The jury just didn't buy it.
I want to talk about the charges that he was convicted of, found guilty on 27 counts, all 27 counts, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 18 counts of cruelty to children, and 5 counts of reckless conduct. And if we're thinking back, in 2024, the parents of Ethan Crumbley, he was a school shooter. They were convicted of involuntary manslaughter. This is different, obviously, though. Colt Gray hasn't even gone to trial yet. In Colin's case, in addition to the involuntary manslaughter, he also was slapped with some murder charges. This was more aggressive than the Crumbleys. Why do you think that is? Do you think the punishment fits the crime here?
Yeah, so we don't know the punishment yet, right? And I think that's something that everyone's going to be really interested in. So this type of murder charge that the defendant was convicted of is murder in the second degree, and it's relatively new in Georgia. So the maximum punishment is going to be 30 years with a minimum of 10. And I think that the court, the sentencing judge, is going to really kind of have a lot to think about, right? If it's a malice murder case, the only sentence can be life, but he's going to have a wide range of sentencing options here, and the sentencing hearing is going to really matter. And I think that will be telling for how future prosecutions go. So, when we have a tragedy like this, it's hard to say that the verdict doesn't match the crime, right? But I do think it's a slippery slope as far as future prosecutions for parents. At what point, if your kid gets a speeding ticket, is the parent responsible for giving a fast car? But when we see that sentence, it's going to be telling for future courts, I think, is this a maximum sentence case? Does he get 100 and something years, or does he get something closer to 10? And I think that's, the judge sat there through the whole trial, and it's going to be very telling as far as what the court thinks as far as the defendant's culpability.
You're in Georgia, so I'm curious what you think that might be. Because when you look back at the Crumbleys, yes, that was a lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. They were sentenced to 10 to 15 years. Colin Gray here is facing a maximum of 180 years in jail. I mean, that's a life sentence, essentially. Do you think that the judge, based on what you've seen, is going to throw the book at him as a warning sign to other parents?
Yes, I'd be shocked if the sentence isn't at least 30 years.
Wow. And like we've been talking about, this is considered a landmark ruling. Do you think this is going to set a precedent for parents of alleged school shooters?
I do. And, this was, and, I expect this DA, the prosecutor on this case, frankly, to be leading trainings for other prosecutors going forward about here's how to build the case. Here's how the theories of the case work. Here's how to prove the culpability. Here are things you should look for when deciding whether to charge the parent or not, right? Not all parents are going to be charged. Unfortunately, in this country, we have too many school shootings. One's too many, but we have a lot. And I expect this to be kind of an instructive case for prosecutors across the country going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if states start passing or at least proposing legislation that specifically addresses a situation like this.
Something that was so shocking that came out in this trial is that Colt Gray's mom testified she was Googling and researching the Crumbleys, who the parents of that school shooter from the 2021 Michigan school shooting, because she potentially was looking for a way to get Colin to store the guns legally. Do you think that this is going to serve as a warning to parents? Because there was a fact, according to a fact gathered by Sandy Hook Promise, around 68% of guns used in school-related incidents are found in the home or provided by a friend or relative.
That is a really complicated solution, because you've got kind of like, the Second Amendment crowd, the very pro-gun crowd, who is completely in support of firearms and them being readily accessible, against people, and also a crowd that they don't want school shootings either, right? So there's no crime in Georgia right now for not storing the gun correctly with kids in the house, right? They can use these other ones, but I would expect kind of the gun lobby, if you will, to be against future legislation or laws that require certain storage of it, and them to say, look, this is a right we have, and these are the risks we associate. Now, will the people of this country in these states buy that? I don't know. But I don't think it's going to be easy for any state to pass legislation requiring certain storage requirements of firearms, because that creates a whole issue of, can law enforcement come in your house and search to make sure you're in compliance? How is that enforced? All of these things. So I think that will be a tough pass for many states, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see it at least tried.
And it felt like, based on what the prosecutors were arguing, is that it wasn't even just about that. It wasn't even just about the storage, right? It was that this kid exhibited major red flags, right? And not only did the dad ignore them, he enabled them. He put a gun in his hand, he put ammunition and a gun easily accessible to him, despite having these countless warning signs, despite law enforcement showing up at his door. But I do want to read something that the prosecutor said during her closing arguments. That man was the one person who could have prevented this mass shooting. He was the one man who ensured that Colt Gray had the tools he needed to commit mass murder. She also said this: that man and his son are both responsible for the immense suffering that occurred on September 4th. The blood is on their hands. Does this answer the question, in your opinion, legally, about who's responsible when a minor commits a mass shooting?
I don't think so. I think someone who is disturbed enough to commit a crime like this is going to find the means, right? Did the access at the house make it easier? Absolutely. That's why the verdict was what it was. That's why the defendant was convicted of these charges based on his son's conduct. However, I do not think that parents being liable is going to stop someone that's disturbed like this from finding the means, right? There have been many other school shootings where they did not get the weapon from their parents and it didn't stop them. So I don't think that there's a true path, as much as we may want there to be, for parents' culpability preventing this from happening. So being a parent's a really hard job, and it does come with great responsibility, and so is being a firearm owner. It comes with great responsibility. But I would not be surprised if we see more prosecutions based on this theory, like I said. But we have to hope that it doesn't go too far, because at some point, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old can do stuff that their parents don't know about, right? And when we start having parents held responsible for all of that, people are going to really have second thoughts about whether they want to bring kids into this world or not, right? Like, what am I going to do in 16 years if my kid's a troublemaker and I can't stop it, right?
Do you think this verdict is a slippery slope? Because I've listened to commentary on this case, and one of the arguments that I've heard is people making this comparison that if I give my kid the keys to a car, they drive that car, they get in an accident and they kill someone, will I be held responsible? But then I've heard that prosecutors essentially argued, no, 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 that is a step too far. This was essentially not giving a kid the keys to a car, it was giving a kid who couldn't drive, who wasn't responsible to drive, not only the keys to a car, but a six-pack of beer to go with it. I mean, what do you make of that argument? Do you think because of this case, we see that separation?
Yeah, so I think that's the perfect analogy. And this prosecutor may think that's a step too far, but the next one may not. And I don't think it's like giving a kid a key to a car with a six pack. I think the better analogy is it's like giving a kid that has two or three speeding tickets the keys to his car still, right? So there's a kid who has broken the traffic laws, but that's his only way to school. The parents keep letting him drive, and all of a sudden he causes a crash that either really hurts someone or kills someone. This prosecutor, like I said, may think that's a step too far, but the next one may not. The one a county over may not. And I think that's something we really think about. Is that a good use of the justice system? Is that parent responsible? Should they not let their kid drive? And ticket, you take the keys away. Is it two? Is it three? Where is the line for that?
And I'm curious, I'm not a lawyer, so tell me if this is unusual, but I found it unusual that the dad had his trial first. He's convicted, he's found guilty of murder charges. Colt Gray is not. He's still the accused school shooter. He hasn't been found guilty yet. And authorities say that he was 14 at the time. He admitted he was responsible. Since then, he's pleaded not guilty to 55 felony counts, including malice murder. What does this verdict do to this case? Because if the dad is guilty. I mean, if I'm Colt Gray, if I'm his team sitting right now thinking about how I'm going to mount his defense, am I thinking, you know what, what's even the point? Because if the dad's guilty, this does this automatically mean he's guilty?
Right. It's going to be a different jury, certainly. But if I'm Colt Gray's defense team, I better hope I've got a different angle, right? And they do. It's going to have to be some sort of mental health defense, insanity or not guilty by reason of insanity or guilty of mentally ill or something. But this is a telling. These jurors were brought in from a different county to kind of try to make it more fair for the defendant in his father's case. But if you're on the defense team for the child, now certainly that any defense that's it wasn't me or I wasn't responsible for it has basically no traction at all. That's not that dog's not going to hunt.
And do you think that this is going to deter school shootings and gun violence in general, or do you think it's going to make parents think twice?
I think it will make parents think twice about their decisions now that they know they can be culpable and held responsible for things like this. I do not think that a verdict like this will deter bad acts or school shootings on behalf of the kids because, the person who goes and does that school shooting has no regard for their future. They're obviously going to be facing life in prison, death penalty, depending on the state. And if they don't care about that for themselves, I think banking on them caring about that for other people is a big ask. They obviously don't care about other people. They wouldn't be doing school shootings, right? So I think that this kind of verdict may help parents be more responsible. I do not think it will actually deter the bad conduct on the actual actor that commits the shootings.
Brian Brown, I really appreciate your insight here, your perspective on this case. Thank you so much for joining me. And when we have more cases like this or others, I hope you can come back on and talk about them.
Thank you for having me very much.